I used to believe that anybody can get good at Apex, but as time went on, I've learned that some people are just flat out uncoachable. I'll list the worst things that may be holding you back from improving, and if you recognize yourself in these examples, I really hope that you'll take action and work on those nasty habits. Let's dive into it. The first and a very common error that I see nowadays is that you're simply going for the wrong person for advice in the first place. A lot of people think that making educational content is a good way to grow, and yeah, they're not wrong, but many of them simply copy what other educational content creators have to say, who very often get the facts wrong or lose out on the actual value of the tip in the process. Knowing who to trust can be hard, but you're probably going to get the best advice from players who have high ranks or other accomplishments in game. Keep in mind though that just because somebody is good at Apex doesn't make them a good coach, and there are plenty of high-level players who make absolutely awful and misleading educational Apex content. Some of them even sell it for $300 a course. It's easy to make content appealing to one's emotions without actually providing value, and obviously I'm not one of those, otherwise I'd advise you to click out of the video. Speaking of emotions, many players just tilt too much. They let their emotions get in the way after one or a set of bad games, which distracts them from the goal at hand, and this tilted mindset infects all of their games for the rest of the play session. If you start feeling emotional, angry, tilted, or sad when playing, take a 10-minute break and go for a walk outside. This will hopefully be enough to reset once you get back into the game. If you are at the bottom of a losing streak and you still can't shake that feeling, either don't queue up at all or just jump into pubs to shake the tilt off. Make sure to never tilt queue because it only makes it worse. When it comes to game settings, I always see hundreds of messages asking streamers about their sensitivity, their settings, even what body wash they use. And the thing is, you could copy the entire life of a pro player but still not even get close to where they are skill-wise. Almost every player starts with the default settings and gradually tweak them to whatever feels best. The exception being if your own settings are so horrible that they're actually holding you back. And that's usually simple things such as your FOV being too low or your sensitivity being too low or too high. You don't have specific keybinds that everyone else uses. Maybe your graphic settings are set too high and more. There's plenty of guides on how you can develop your own settings, and I've really only made guides on how to tweak your own graphic settings and how to find your true sensitivity. But if you guys are interested in learning on how to tweak your own settings to become as good as possible, let me know in the comments and maybe we'll get a guide out on that soon. Your peripherals generally don't matter as long as we aren't talking about the absolutely worst peripherals possible. It's okay to have a cheaper gaming mouse instead of the nice brand stuff, but what isn't okay is a ball mouse and playing on a thick CRT screen that's older than you are. On top of that, there's a concerning amount of people on mouse and keyboard playing with either lack of mouse space, way too small of a mousepad, or no mousepad at all. These are all critical in order to succeed, since without sufficient space or the consistency of a mousepad, there's no way that you can become consistent yourself. Your frames per second generally don't matter either, as long as they're consistent and above a certain standard. If you can hold a consistent frame rate at around 60 frames a second or higher, this doesn't apply to you, but if you're looking at 5 to 10 FPS, and yes, there are plenty of people in this position, upgrading your hardware or just fixing your settings will net you a significant boost in your gameplay performance. You might be using guns that you like but aren't necessarily good. While a lot of weapons currently are pretty solid in terms of the meta, players still opt to choose worse weapons that feel better to use because it makes them feel better about themselves, not realizing that they're shooting themselves in the foot, literally and figuratively speaking. And when they do choose the weapons that are meta, they might end up choosing weapons that don't fit their playstyle at all. For example, someone choosing a sniper rifle or a marksman rifle as a secondary weapon and then constantly pushing fights with it will simply not work. Keep in mind, I am generally all in favor of letting people play however they want and whatever they want, but if they want to get results, sometimes they are going to have to stop running the RE45 and the P2020 combo and actually start picking something useful for once. It's near impossible to improve if you can't win any fight because of your choice of weaponry. Although sometimes it may be hard to really know which weapons are good, and some might seem like a good choice but actually have a lot of drawbacks, such as a devotion. I've talked more in depth about this in my season 14 tier list video. The same goes for your legends. There isn't much room for improvement if you're playing legends that are massively holding you back. It's okay to play an off-meta pick, but some legends may be crutches for deeper issues in your playstyle, and if you don't step out of your comfort zone, you'll never get a chance to actually improve. A lot of players also have a tendency of blaming external factors as soon as things take a turn for the worse. A death or loss is caused by audio, lag, bad teammates, or whatever excuse you can think of in the moment. Now, this has to be said, there are going to be times where you got completely screwed over for reasons way beyond your control. It is Apex Legends after all, but there's very often a lot of things that you could have done differently not to have that specific thing cause your death. I normally tell people, ask yourself why 5 times. Let me explain. For example, I died to this guy who pushed me for no reason, and I didn't hear him. What the hell, audio? Well, why did he push you? Maybe because you were low health? And why were you low health? Because you were overextended and overpeaked. Why did you overpeak? Because you don't think about your peaks. Or maybe you overestimated your aim skill. Is your movement bad? Is your aim bad? Let's work on that. You're now at the root of the issue. Almost every situation can be traced back to a fundamental skill this way, and applying this framework will passively make you improve every time that you die. The next issue goes hand in hand with what I mentioned formerly, but is probably more important. There are way too many players who simply turn their brain off and go on autopilot. And it sucks because when somebody goes on autopilot and dies, it is impossible to answer the 5 whys with actual answers because, let's face it, there wasn't any reason to you dying other than not making any thoughtful decisions and just not paying attention. Always stay on your toes, try to keep a good grip of what the enemy team is doing, what they're planning to do, and try to think ahead to figure out what you and your teammates can do to win that fight. When you are rotating, constantly keep thinking about how you can rotate and what positions to take, and if you're holding a position, don't just stare at a wall and play Clash Royale. Scout around and figure out what's going on around you. Maybe even look for more loot to top up your team if the situation allows it. Don't let your mind go idle at any point in the game. And when it comes to asking yourself questions, almost no players, including pros and myself, VOD review nearly enough, and if they do, they don't really do it effectively. VOD reviewing is a great tool to combine with the 5 whys, since you have a chance to watch back the entire situation and be completely truthful with yourself in an environment where you are removed from your own emotions. If your setup allows it, try to install some type of software that passively records your gameplay when you play, such as the NVIDIA Shadow Play, and make a habit to watch it all back later on in the day. You can either watch the entire game you played or narrow it down to situations where you lost or died and retracing your steps that way. Getting a chance to look at the same situation again in third person gives you a completely new perspective and is a great way to learn. At the same time, not enough players look into getting a third-party coach, and if they do, they've never even VOD reviewed themselves in the first place. Always start with watching your own VODs back, then maybe comparing your gameplay to the gameplay of one of your favorite streamers. Many of your bad habits should stand out like a sore thumb, and you probably don't want to look into spending money on a coach before you feel that nothing really stands out or that you hit a rut. Just spending a little time reflecting on your games, not necessarily looking through the VOD, will make wonders for your performance and probably help you get out of that specific rut. As for playstyles, players very regularly choose to play either too aggressively or too defensively for their own good. I'll cover these two separately. If you play too aggressively, you've probably heard a lot of people, myself included, saying that you should continue pushing fights and looking for ways to get into the action. This is still true, mind you, but there's a difference between being aggressive and constantly looking for openings and taking fights that you feel you can chew versus blindly rushing into the first team that you see. If you never set up fights properly, you'll just end up as cannon fodder, and there isn't really much to learn if you just instantly get downed before the fight even starts. And the ideal playstyle lies somewhere in the middle because the defensive players are just as bad and probably more common than the aggressive ones. These players either play defensive by taking a high ground and sitting on it with Caustic and Watson, or take it to the next level by triple crouching in a corner to avoid any possible action. God forbid they play the game, right? And sure, this might get you some placement points, but you aren't even playing the game. If you're struggling in, say, silver and you decide to rat into gold, all you're doing is making things harder for yourself when you finally start trying to play for fights, because you're no longer fighting silvers, you're fighting gold players. Those guys are better at the game. That's how ranking works. Of course, there is a middle ground here where you want to do what's best in your situation. Sometimes you want to hold the high ground, hold the god spot, or control the zone, and sometimes you want to either push fights for kill points, or maybe you're forced to do so because there's no other option. When making a decision, you want to keep making decisions that have over a 50% success rate, preferably in the 60 to 80% range, but keep in mind that sitting still and holding a spot doesn't have to mean it's less of a risky decision, and in some cases sitting still and holding a position will simply get you killed. And pushing that team would have been the best decision, and making this change in your playstyle will probably lead to you losing some fights, but you may have to take some fights that you will lose if you want to start improving. Very few players communicate with their teammates either when free stacking or solo queuing, and if you want to improve and gain RP, opening your mic or at the very least pinging may be the difference between life and death. Communicating with your team allows you to make sure that everyone's on the same page with their loot, their plan, and that they focus on the right thing when any fight starts. A bad plan is always better than no plan at all. Really, don't underestimate communication. And of course, very few players actually take aim training seriously. Training your eyes, your hand-eye coordination, and anything else is incredibly important, as Apex is a first-person shooter, and the higher damage that you can output, the easier it is to make the right decision. If you want to increase your aim, either on controller or on PC, check out the video on the screen for my newest updated aim guide. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.